We are live. I'm not going to dance tonight, but I am going to do just a classic. Oh, we can raise the volume on that. Just a classic air horn sound effect. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Happy New Year. Happy new variant. Omicron is surging. Schools are closing again, as many of you know. If you are jumping in, if you are joining us, tell me in the comments how your day went, if you had to deal with at-home school again starting today. Parents are left facing that same, I'll speak for myself, like crippling anxiety that I haven't had since early 2020. And that's why I called this Emergency Live with the one and only, hi everybody, the one and only Dr. Tali Bogler of St. Michael's Hospital. She is the chair of Family Medicine Obstetrics there in Toronto. She's going to answer all of your questions about Omicron. We'll get the pronunciation. I don't know if it's or I don't even want to know how to pronounce that bitch's name, but I'll figure it out. Omicron, kids under 5, babies, vaccines, kids and vaccines, boosters, masks, tests, antibodies, school closures, so much more. So without further ado, I just want to get right to it. Please help me welcome and say thank you to Dr. Tali Bogler. Hi.
Hi, Jessie. Thanks so much for having me.
I know. I don't want you to feel somber. We want to get the information out. I know it's a really scary time, but I'm so encouraged by how many people are jumping on already, how many people are saying hi in the comments, how many people jumped into my DMs, my emails, asking questions. And so I want to start by saying thank you for being here to help us make sense of it all. Because I know that you've been working in the hospital nonstop. You were literally on call last night. You run the Pandemic Pregnancy Guide Instagram page, which everybody has to stop what they're doing and follow right now because it provides such helpful information for women and moms going through this. And so, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of the really important things you do to talk with us.
It's really my pleasure to be here. And I actually want to say thank you to you, for using your platform actually to share information and evidence and to be a source of support and comfort for so many parents right now. So thank you.
Oh, well, can I call you Tali?
Yeah, yes, please call me Tali. Yeah.
So I want to preface this conversation because I was surprised how many people got up on my Instagram and said, you're getting paid for this. Who's paying you? And I just want to say, I'm not getting paid. You're not getting paid by anyone. We're not here to make money or judge or promote any agenda. We just want to help, empower, and educate this audience with facts so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families during this frustrating and confusing time. Correct?
100%.
Okay. So everyone watching, jump in the comments like you always do. The questions that I'm asking, Tali, all come from you. I took the most asked questions. I'm going to ask them all tonight. Honestly, we're going to cover so many things. And the first thing that I want to talk about is sending our kids back to daycares and back to schools, because I sent my kids back to preschool on Monday in Los Angeles. They test the kids here. So they both had negative PCR tests. And when I got there were 4 kids who showed up, 4 of 15, and 2 of them were mine. And I was like, am I a terrible parent? Like, nobody else felt comfortable sending their kid back to school. So Tali, please answer the question so many of us want to know. Should we be sending our unvaccinated kids under 5 to daycare, to preschool, or back to school if it's an option?
Yeah. And, Jessie, it's a great question. Before we even begin, I just want to preface by saying, I think all parents want what's best for their kids, right? And these decisions become so difficult in the face of uncertainty, right? There's no right or wrong answer. And I think it's often hard when we compare ourselves to what other families or parents are doing. And I think the answer to this question about whether you should send your unvaccinated to school is, is complicated. There is no one size fits all answer, and every situation is so different. As a parent, there's certain factors to consider. So what is your individual risk tolerance? And I often find in couples, that's not always the same, right? So in my relationship, I'm a little bit more of the anxious person. And so sometimes the anxious person gets to decide, sometimes not.
You're also the doctor. You have the facts to back up the anxiety.
But yeah, so what is your individual risk tolerance, or as a couple or by yourself, what is your tolerance? What are the risk factors? So does your child or anyone else in your family have any underlying health conditions? And then what are the mitigation measures in the school or daycare to minimize the risk of COVID? So that's the first thing. And so, what are those things that could actually minimize risk? So, obviously, vaccination is the number one best thing. If your kid is eligible, or the teachers or everyone around the kid, testing when accessible. So, you have you have access to rapid tests. It's a little bit harder here in Ontario to have access to rapid tests. Wearing masks, good masks, and we could talk about that a little bit. Okay. Good ventilation in schools. And so, all of those are additional layers of protection that minimize the risk. Unfortunately, some communities don't have access to those resources. And policies, they vary widely across provinces and jurisdictions. In my opinion, and I think many people hold the same opinion, the benefits of in-person learning are very, very hard to ignore. No kids need school for their cognitive, for their social and mental development. We also know that many families actually rely on school for meals and do not have other options for childcare and need to go back to work.
It's a luxury to be able to say, should I send my kid back? So
100%.
many working parents don't have the option.
They don't have a choice. And I also recognize that teachers and the families need to feel safe going back to school and needs to be feasible. And so coupling all of that with, what's the risk of COVID-19 illness in children under 5? We know it's very low. It's not zero, but it's overall very low. And so if you do choose to send your kid under 5 unvaccinated to school, it's not unreasonable. And if you do choose to send your kid to school, there are all of those factors that you can employ to minimize the risk even further that we just discussed. So again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's making that decision that's best for you and your family.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you this, but I'm just going to ask you, and if you're not comfortable answering, don't. But you have twin girls. That's partly how we bonded and connected, who are the same age as my boys, 4. Did you send them back?
So we did. And actually, it was a game time decision. Our daycare that the girls go to opened up on Monday. And it wasn't until Sunday night that we made that decision. Interestingly, even though I'm a little bit more on the anxious side of things, my partner did make the decision. He was a bit more decisive, which was helpful. And we made that decision based on the fact that, the type of school that they go to, they have employed many of the mitigation measures in terms of ventilation and proper masks. All the teachers are vaccinated. The parents, from what we know, are all vaccinated and boosted. So we felt relatively comfortable to make the decision. I have to say, making the decision was harder than actually just going ahead with it.
Yeah.
So, we had that option. They're in daycare. Was it the right or wrong decision? I don't know. It feels okay right now. But again, I think part of the difficulty is actually just making that decision. And people will face it once schools reopen again. So
Right.
here in Ontario, the decision has essentially been made for many parents, but hopefully soon enough they're going to open, and we're still going to be faced with that decision for many parents.
And let's just jump into it if we can. We're going to hit all the hot topics right off the top. Do you think it was a wise decision of the Ontario School Board to go back to online learning?
So I just want to say that this has become such a contentious issue. And sadly, what makes me the most upset about everything is that our kids are caught in the middle of all of it. I firmly believe, and many believe, that school is the essential workplace of children. It's much more than just education. It's essential for their mental, their social, cognitive development. And we know that prolonged closures, will and continue to have a prolonged, profound effect on, educational losses and the well-being of our children and their families, parents, and caregivers, especially on women, because we know that women overwhelmingly bear the job of caring for children. Many people have used this phrase that schools should be the last to close and the first to open. At the same time, I also recognize that schools need to be safe for teachers and their families, and it needs to be feasible. And they have been a source of transmission, those kids going back into their community. So I don't think we can discount that completely. But, the majority of school-age children are eligible for vaccines, and their educators are eligible for vaccines. So I think we need to reopen schools as quickly as possible and implement the necessary measures with obviously that layered approach. So make vaccines as accessible as possible and provide information to parents of kids or educators who are still feeling a little bit more nervous about vaccines. We need to use rapid tests, especially when there's outbreaks, so kids can stay in school, improve the ventilation and filtration in our school system. And all students and teachers need to have access to good quality masks. And I think, there's ways to keep schools open, even during an Omicron surge. We've seen it in other places. But we need to recognize that schools are an essential place for our kids, and then we need to allocate the necessary resources to ensure they're safe. So again, just like everything in this pandemic, nothing is black or white. It's nuanced. And I think we just need to be able to listen to each other and together find ways and allocate the resources to make it safe for everyone.
I'm seeing a lot of comments that agree with you, a lot of yeses, a lot of clapping emojis. I think parents are just so tired of it. And we know enough now where we can take the preventative steps. So here's a question from a viewer. This is from Sarah Tannenbaum, and this is going to help color the rest of our conversation. How are unvaccinated kids and babies, she says, doing with the Omicron variant? I have an unvaccinated 3-year-old and a 7-month-old. So Sarah, we're basically the same, but I have 2.
Yeah, it's a very important question. And one I have my kids are under 5. And sorry, my kids are actually screaming right now, but they're supposed to be sleeping. So I'm hearing them and thinking of them as you ask that question. So we're basically asking the question, is Omicron more or less severe in kids under 5? And I'll again preface this answer by saying, I'll be speaking about kids who are otherwise healthy children, because I think if you have a kid with a medical condition, I really do think it's best for you to speak to their doctor, because their individual risk will depend on their underlying condition, which varies based on the condition that we're speaking about. I think this is personally, when I'm reflecting on this question, I think it's become difficult for parents with kids under 5 because the media, do you hear them screaming in the background?
A little, I hear a little bit, but I'm not sure if it's yours or mine. It could very well be mine.
Sorry. I think the media and reports have done a good job, I think, in making the clear distinction between people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated. So if we look at hospital reports, we see that the majority of people who are hospitalized or in the ICU are unvaccinated. And so our minds automatically jump to, but my kid under 5 is not vaccinated. So are they going to be part of that group that's more hospitalized or in the ICU? And that's where our mind goes. And that's why it's really hard to be making these decisions about schools and potential infection. So what I want to really emphasize is that what we can say based on everything that we know, including recent data from the UK, from Germany, from the US, and this is data from December, so it's really like data from Omicron, is that the risk to children, young children, from COVID-19 is extremely small. So specifically out of the UK, and I actually just heard this on a talk by Dr. Catherine Smart, she's the president of the Canadian Medical Association and a pediatrician. She said the data from the UK is showing that Omicron is almost 60% less likely to cause hospitalization in children. So Omicron specifically does not appear to be posing a specific risk to children. So low risk is not no risk, right? So some children throughout the pandemic, even very young children have gotten very sick with COVID-19, and a tiny, tiny number of them have died. And, this is tragic. No child should die. And I think this is why we would want to vaccinate our children right when they're eligible, because any serious illness from COVID-19 at this point is vaccine preventable. And we want to also protect those in our families who are more vulnerable. But, putting that aside for a second, the risk is still very low. And I think because of that, there is very little value in instilling fear in parents by telling them, that their unvaccinated toddlers going to daycare or school, or basically throwing them to the wolves if you send them to daycare. And I saw that a lot on social media. And I actually, I felt that way a little bit too. Like, am I sending my kids and throwing them to the wolves by sending them to school because they're going to get COVID? So I think it's understandable that people feel that way, but I think it's really important that we break it down and put things into perspective. Okay. Number one, Omicron is more transmissible, right? We know that there is greater transmissibility, but that's not the same as severity. So with really large numbers of COVID-19 in our communities, this will lead to a lot more cases. Right. So even if that proportion, that percentage of kids getting more seriously ill is small if that denominator, the number of cases, is so big, the absolute number is going to become more significant. So it's like it's a numbers game. So it's
Yeah.
that denominator.
Yeah, I read a very scary stat that said something like 66% more kids are being hospitalized with Omicron. Well, how many more kids are getting it, right? It's all relative, and it's still a very, very low number is what you're saying.
And even to that point, Jessie, like we are seeing higher rates of hospitalization, pediatric hospitalizations. We're seeing it in New York City. We're seeing it here in Ontario. But the thing is, we still need better reporting from hospitals. So we see this increase in hospitalization, and we're actually seeing a slightly higher rate in the 0 to 4 group compared to 5 to 11 kids. But it's really important to remember a few things. So if you don't mind me breaking it down a little bit,
Please.
the 0 to 4 group, particularly 0 to 1, is most at risk of hospitalization for virtually any viral illness than the 5 to 11 group. And that's because we're just more cautious with younger kids, especially in the first month of life, the first few months of life. Like as a physician, when a parent calls me and their kid has a fever in the first few months of life, especially that first month, I'm much more worried. I'm much more worried about bacterial infections. I send them to the hospital because actually our protocols recommend a certain battery of investigations. And usually that requires a hospitalization. So in general, the 0 to 4 group have higher hospitalizations than the 5 to 11 group. So I think that's important to remember. Also, 0 to 4, it's not further broken down by age. So there's a difference between 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to 4. And lastly, it doesn't really talk about incidental COVID. So every kid that gets admitted to hospital gets a COVID swab. And so we don't know from those numbers that we're seeing, let's say here in Ontario, how many of those kids are being admitted with COVID or from COVID. And I know many people say, well, like, what's really the difference in older people? I think in older adults, or especially with people with underlying conditions, it might not make as much of a difference. But in kids, it really does. And I think when we're trying to answer this question, is Omicron more or less severe in kids? We kind of need to know those numbers. Is it like all the kids admitted, it's more incidental, or is it some of those kids? And I think without that data, it's really hard to draw a conclusion, and you could kind of make the wrong conclusion in either direction. And lastly, I think it's really important to have perspective. So in developed countries, on a yearly basis, 1 to 3% of children get admitted to hospital with RSV. That's a respiratory virus. So in Canada, in children, 0.3% have been hospitalized during the pandemic of children, right? So, and again,
with COVID or a variant. Yeah.
No, with COVID-19, sorry. So I think the bottom line is the risk in children under 5 is very low. It's comparable or somewhat lower than other common diseases. It's low, it's not zero, right? And deaths are extremely, extremely rare. I just think it's very important to put things into perspective. Hopefully I explain things. I know it's a lot of data.
No, but I always go back to your kids because this helps me. I like what I love about you is not just that you're a female doctor, because God bless female doctors, but that you are a mom. And I think that colors your perspective, a mom of unvaccinated twins. So if you're sent your kids back to daycare, did you and your husband have the conversation of like, well, if they get Omicron,
they'll probably do fine. They'll probably do fine.
Okay.
That was sort of the
we had that conversation, and I was like, we said if they get it, they get it.
Look, I think, again, very small number have gotten more sick. And I'm not trying to, downplay the fact that some kids did get really sick. That's traumatic and it's tragic. And again, I preface this by saying that this is about kids, again, without underlying health conditions, because maybe their risk factor is a little bit higher. And, potentially if our kids had that, or somebody in our family had underlying health conditions, potentially, again, our decision-making would have been different.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why it's still really important to kind of look at your individual situation and your family situation when making these decisions.
Well, and by the way, I sent my kids to school, and I have a 0 to 1. I have a 7-month-old at home. And like, if I gave this face COVID, if we could just put, if I gave this person COVID, Dr. Bogler, I
So
could
cute.
not live with myself. So do I have a different decision-making process if I have a baby at home, or is what you're saying that the hospitalization rates again are super low?
Yeah, that is such a good question. It's very timely. Actually, a statement just came out today about newborns. And I don't want to scare you because I actually have some reassuring information for
Okay,
you.
good. Stephanie is with me too in the comments. Go ahead.
So there has been an uptick of infants being admitted to hospital. And we've seen this data from Ottawa and the Hospital of Sick Children in Toronto. And so for a couple of reasons, we're always more worried about infants because of those things I was telling you before. We we're more cautious. There's a battery of interventions and investigations that we do with younger kids with a fever. But you got vaccinated in your pregnancy.
Yes,
How
I
old is
did.
your baby now?
Sorry, I did. The baby is 7 months and I got boosted while I'm still
Yeah.
breastfeeding.
So, what we have found is all of those babies that have been admitted to hospital, especially in the ones in Ottawa, their mothers were not vaccinated in their pregnancy. And what's so amazing about getting vaccinated in pregnancy is that the antibodies likely last about 3 to even 6 months of that baby's life, to provide protection. And you got boosted while breastfeeding, and we know there's antibodies in breast milk too. So I think, you and your partner and your family have probably done all the right things to, protect your baby. And so, congratulations to that.
Oh my God. Thank you. I mean, I still feel like cut to, at some point we might get it, and that's okay. But just knowing that we did everything we could to prevent it is sort of what I want to do, and what I think most of the people watching right now want to do too. So we skipped a little bit ahead, but that's okay because I want to talk about antibodies in breast milk. If you don't mind me confessing something that's sort of gross, I have been sneaking my breast milk into Rio and Dre's cereal on occasion in hopes that maybe they'll get antibodies. Is that a waste of breast milk?
Yeah, well, okay. So no, it's not a waste, but I
Okay.
have to ask you a couple questions. Like, I
Yes.
don't know how much breast milk you're actually producing.
Not
Like, maybe you're
enough.
like a big producer and you have like plenty.
No, she's drying up. She is drying up.
Okay, so can I talk a little bit about antibodies in breast milk for a second?
Please.
So as I said, we know that antibodies pass in breast milk. And I think there's like too many studies now to even, pick out anyone specifically. And we see this actually with other vaccines that we give, like the flu vaccine or whooping cough vaccine. We actually
During
show,
pregnancy.
yeah, and also, but we know that mothers who do breastfeed there is that protection through breast milk, preventing respiratory illnesses. With the flu vaccine, particularly, like it's a modest benefit. It's not huge, but it's modest. There are differences in antibodies that are passed through breast milk versus when you're pregnant through the placenta. And so I just want to talk about that for a second.
Yes.
So when antibodies in pregnancy through the placenta, it's primarily IgG antibodies that pass through. And these actually stick around in your blood for a good amount of time, as I said, about 3 to 6 months in the baby. Breastfeeding antibodies are a little bit different. So the ones that transfer through breast milk are IgA antibodies. And they're specially adapted to live at like the mucosal surfaces, the lining of your nose, mouth, and gut. So they're kind of like this non-stick coating. So if the virus tries to get into your baby via one of these routes, those IgA antibodies can stop the virus basically from getting in. And as I said, we have evidence from the flu vaccine that this is one of the ways that we protect breastfeeding babies. So the thing is, some people ask the question, like, is it better to get vaccinated in pregnancy or while breastfeeding?
We had a few of those come in, yes.
So first of all, I would just say get the vaccine whenever you're eligible. But there is a difference between pregnancy and breastfeeding. More antibodies get passed through the placenta while pregnant, but that's primarily because it's a different type of antibody that gets passed through. So again, that IgG that sticks in the blood and sticks around for a long time is different from those IgA antibodies. I'm just reading the questions that's getting in. So the issue with the IgA
Sorry, Ducky One says, tell all the people who gave you so much hate for getting vaccinated during pregnancy, they can shove it. I'll tell them worse than shove it, Ducky One. And you know what? I'll show them a picture of my baby and be like, hey, she turned out pretty good.
She looks so
pretty cute. But thank you. Yes. Any excuse to just put her face up. So Tali, so just so I know from my perspective and anyone who got vaccinated when they were pregnant around the same time, 6 months, my daughter was 6 months. So those first 6 months, she probably had those antibodies you're talking about. And now
now she's probably IgA. Exactly.
Okay. Yes. And when I stopped breastfeeding her, so
that's the thing. So these IgA antibodies that coat the mucosal surfaces, like every time you cough or sneeze or eat, they basically get sloughed off. And so when you breastfeed again, she'll get topped up with them again, but you have to continuously breastfeed.
I see.
So that's why it's different. And then so if you're giving some of that breast milk in the cereal, I don't know how much they're actually getting. If they're eating the cereal too and sloughing off the IgA antibodies, like maybe they're getting protection in that moment, but you probably need to continuously give them that breast milk to give them ongoing protection. And if you don't have, like the biggest supply of breast milk, you might not want to be doing that. There is absolutely no harm. Really, there's no harm. Okay. But I just want to say, I think breastfeeding for many people is a challenge. I breastfed twins too. It's it can be crazy. And I think if you're enjoying and you have lots of milk, then your babies are getting, the added benefit of antibodies. But if it's a nightmare and no one's enjoying it anymore, and given that the benefit is probably moderate, I wouldn't say you need to torture yourself to continue breastfeeding just for the antibodies.
But it's so good to hear. And I'm seeing people saying they feel reassured or that they made the choice to get vaccinated while pregnant. It's a hard decision to make, but do everything you can is the message that
100%. You do what you can do. You do your best. And I think that's what we all need to do to survive right now in every situation.
Honestly, everything, parenting, COVID, you do what you can do. You do your best, and your best is good enough always. Okay. I want to go back to our viewer questions because we had so many questions about long COVID. At Rebel Joe asks, I want to know about long COVID in kids.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if everyone knows what long COVID is.
I had to Google it.
Yeah, that's fine. It's basically lingering unresolved COVID-19 symptoms. So many people have reported fatigue or brain fog or loss of taste of smell. It seems to be more rare in children than it is in adults, although it can happen. The issue with actually knowing is it common in kids or not is that the majority of the early studies on long COVID in children were very low quality studies and didn't have comparator groups. And what I mean by that and why it's important in kids is because some of those symptoms, those long COVID symptoms like fatigue or, those are common symptoms in kids that don't have COVID, right? So you really need to have a comparator group to say, is it really more common in kids that have COVID-19 infection or is it just because they're kids? And so one study, and it's a systematic review that looked at studies, they actually only looked at good quality studies that had comparator groups. And in that analysis, they actually found that the rates of long COVID were much smaller in kids than originally quoted. So out of the 14 most common long COVID symptoms, out of those 14, only 5 were actually seen in the kids that had infection compared to the kids that didn't. They were headache, sore throat, or a sore eye, some cognitive difficulties and loss of smell. And what's even more interesting, it was actually found more common in 6 to 11 and 12 to 18. So the older kids. So with all that, I think probably, it's very, very small in young kids and it almost always resolves. But it's a really good question. And I think we're still learning. But from what I've gathered, it is quite small and much smaller in young kids.
That's so reassuring. A lot of people who asked me that question said they couldn't find any information about long COVID in kids. So
I wish I could like put up that systematic review so that everyone could read it, but there is one. I'm happy to share it. Come on Pandemic Pregnancy Guide, and you can DM me and I can send it to you.
Yes, everybody should be following Pandemic Pregnancy Guide. Tally's Instagram page has so much great information. Okay, before we jump to vaccines and kids, because we have so many questions about that, just quickly, if you can tell us, anxious parents, at the Hambler asked this question: if our kids get COVID, what symptoms warrant a trip to the ER or to the doctor?
Yeah, that is such an important question. The Hambler, thank you for asking it.
These serious questions coming from like Ducky 1, 1,
No,
2,
this is
4.
really, really important. And it's
Imagine.
important because we know that Omicron is, very transmissible. We're going to see and know more people that have COVID. And it's important to know, when should I be more concerned? So first of all, like, what would it even look like if your kid gets COVID? I think I would say to parents, you should expect something that looks like any other viral illness, like a scratchy sore throat or cough, or actually seen more sore throat and like a croupy, barky, like cough with Omicron. They could have congestion, a runny nose, fatigue, muscle aches, or fever. And it could actually even be milder than that. So maybe just like a fever for one day and then that's it. I would recommend that you have a thermometer at home. So if your kid is less than 2, we usually measure in the armpit. Like a rectal one is more accurate, but most people don't do that. 2 to 5, we'd say either in the armpit or the ear. So in the armpit, a temperature is anything greater than 37.5. Sorry, this is in Celsius.
Yep. I still only do Celsius.
Okay, great. You're still a Canadian at heart.
Yeah.
You haven't been fully converted. And then the ear temperature is 38. And so if your kid, sorry, I was getting a message. If your kid has a fever or is complaining of muscle aches, acetaminophen, so Tylenol or ibuprofen, if the kid is over greater than 6 months, is totally fine. And I just recommend, can you hear me?
Yes.
Jesse, great. Sorry, I'm getting some input. I recommend that you follow the label on the bottle so that you don't go over the recommended dose for 24 hours.
Okay.
So when to go to your doctor or when to go to the emergency department, I think that, typically this is the same advice that I would actually give for any viral illness in kids. It's really no different for COVID. The big things to always watch out for in your kid with any viral illness is trouble breathing. So if it's really bad, sometimes you can see the sides of their nose like flaring, or the muscles in between their rib. They're using their muscles. They need to use their muscles more to help them breathe. So that's one thing. So trouble breathing. Okay. Or lethargic, like it's hard to wake them up or for them to stay awake. Or signs of dehydration. So they have a very dry mouth. When they're crying, there's no tears. They're not urinating as much, or they're not taking liquids by mouth. Those are the really big 3 things. The other thing is a fever that's lasting more than 3 days, or a fever that's not coming down with the Tylenol or Advil. Other ones like pressure or pain in the chest, or any cognitive changes, or if their skin color or lip color are changing, those are less common, but also things to watch out for. I think, if there's any doubt, call your primary care provider. Even if they're not doing in-person visits, many people are still doing in-person visits and should call them for a virtual phone call to find out what to do. Call telehealth. Any concern, you go to the emergency department.
Okay, that is great to know. And can I just go back to the rectal thermometer? I have the electronic one that I just put on the forehead. Is that no good?
It's potentially not as accurate. If you really want to be as accurate as possible, it's the armpit for your kids. Or if you have an ear one, an armpit one is usually easier to find. I know.
Okay, let's talk about vaccines and kids. When can we expect a vaccine for kids under 5?
Yeah. And I need to know that as well, because my kids are under 5. And
I'm so nervous about it, but at this point, how long are we going to wait?
Yeah. And I think many parents were gutted by the news from Pfizer in December about the failure of their vaccine trial for kids less than 5. So Pfizer has been running vaccine trials for less than 5 in 2 age groups, 6 to 24 and 2 to 5. And then the company in December announced that their trial did not show a good enough immune response in the 2 to 5-year-old group after 2 doses of a 3 microgram dose. So just for people to know, so in children 5 and up, we use 10 micrograms. Okay. And in adults, we actually use 30 micrograms. So they chose a very, very small dose. And it just didn't produce as good of an immune response compared to older age teenagers. There were no issues with safety or side effects that they reported, but the lower dose just didn't do the trick. So they're currently, what they've stated is that they're currently looking at a third dose of that 3 microgram dose to see if that does the trick. We don't really have details from Pfizer why they chose a 3 microgram as opposed to the 10. And then the other company, Moderna, their vaccine trial is still in process. Apparently, it might be done by the end of January. So maybe by the spring, we'll have access to Moderna. But that's all I got.
So, but that's interesting because I am guilty of just seeing the headlines that the trials failed, and I assumed that perhaps it was safety related. So to know that it was absolutely not safety related, it was just the dose wasn't as effective as it needs to be.
Yeah, they had a really small dose, 3 micrograms.
Right.
And 5 and up kids have, 10 micrograms. So it was really.
Is there any word on, this is from, me, but also at Nickelmond, any word on earlier access to vaccines for kids born in 2017? So my boys have an August birthday. Could they get it now?
Yeah. And I've been asking the same question again, because my girls were born in 2017. And there were some social media Twitter posts of parents in Ottawa who got their kids vaccinated who were born in 2017. And then on Tuesday, a statement came out from Ottawa Public Health saying that was a glitch in the system. And we're not yet giving kids who are not 5 the vaccine. So there's no word yet. Interestingly, we did give almost 12-year-olds, so 11-year-olds in Ontario, the vaccine before they were actually 12. There's no official statement yet. I actually don't know of anywhere really in the world, like to my knowledge, that are giving 4-year-olds, almost 5, the 10 microgram dose. I haven't heard that. It will be off-label in the sense that that age group has not yet been studied in a vaccine trial. I'm not an immunologist, but immunologically speaking, there really shouldn't be any difference between a 4-year-old that's almost turning 5 and a 5-year-old in terms of it being effective or in terms of more side effects.
Right.
But so far, no word. And I think it's just important to know that the 5-year-old, that cutoff is just because vaccine trials need a cutoff. It's not for any special reason. Nothing magically changes at 5. It's just vaccine trials need very strict cutoffs, and their cutoff was 5.
So again, I'm just going to ask you more personal questions, even though you are a doctor with scientific information, but will you be getting your girls vaccinated as soon as it's available?
Yes, I will. I certainly will. And for some of the reasons that I mentioned before, yes, we know that kids under 5 are low risk for serious illness, but a serious illness from COVID-19 is vaccine preventable. So if we have a vaccine that can prevent serious illness and has, very minimal side effects that are mild and short term, of course I will. But that's, that makes the most logical sense to me.
Yeah. And it's hard when it comes to kids to make logical decisions with your brain and not decisions with your heart. And so I understand the hesitation that a lot of parents have. So what would you say to parents who are still nervous to vaccinate their 5+ kids? Like Kate Cork said, no question, I'm just horrified to vax my little one. And I get it.
Yeah, I get that people are scared. I think as parents, I really believe that we all want to do what's best for our kids. I really, really do. And I get that. I even see that with my patients who are pregnant and the fact that they're scared, and it's not coming from a bad place. It's not necessarily coming from an ignorant place whatsoever. It's just they want to do what's best and they're nervous. Again, I think we need to focus. We need to make things simple, and knowing that any serious illness from COVID-19 infection is preventable from a vaccine is a really, really strong argument. And I think at this point, we have lots of safety data on the vaccine. We weren't where we were several months ago when the trial just came out. We now have a report. The CDC just published a report that from over 8.7 million kids ages 5 to 11 have received the COVID-19 vaccination. And any serious problems from the COVID-19 vaccine were extremely, extremely rare. And the side effects, were common. But that's just really basically your body doing what it needs to do in terms of your body's immune system is building protection. They were mild and they were brief, most common after the second vaccine. And the most common side effects were just like pain at the injection site, fatigue, or headache, and were brief. There were, out of those 8.7 million kids, there were 11 reports of myocarditis. So that's inflammation of the heart muscle. 7 had fully recovered, and 4 were just being reported at the time of the vaccine trial.
Okay.
So the bottom line is it's vaccine preventable. Any serious illness, vaccines are safe. And, it's common to have mild but very brief side effects. And I think this really should provide a good level of reassurance to parents who have sort of been waiting for the broader rollout. We now have it, and it's safe.
It's so good to hear. And it's so true. Like, even with Romy, I'm taking her in every month and she's getting shots left, right, and center. And I'm like, oh, I'm giving her every vaccine to prevent all of polio, like everything that has happened on planet Earth. And now there's
those
another
are rare,
thing.
by the way. They're rare right
like,
now.
I'm still giving her all those vaccines. We've probably, most of us watching this, have vaccinated our kids. So it does sort of fall under the same category, even though it's hard to wrap our head around because it is new. Okay. So then here's a question. And by the way, we have so much to cover. We're going to talk about masking for your kids. We're going to talk about these.
It's going to become a 2-hour live. Jessie.
I know. No. I promise you have really important things to do. But I wanted to go back to all of us who have unvaccinated kids. What can we do? And this was a question that came in from a viewer, Leah Saxo.
And I think these are all the same things that I actually discussed when we talked about school safety. So making sure everyone around them is vaccinated if they're not vaccinated yet. Obviously.
Oh, so are we not hanging out with unvaccinated relatives?
I mean, I personally wouldn't. Again, this is an individual decision, family decision to make. I mean, some people have said, well, they're hanging out with other unvaccinated kids. So what's the difference between an unvaccinated adult? Well, there is a difference, right? An unvaccinated adult, not just in terms of what they might transmit to your kids, but what your kids might transmit to the adult and what other health conditions or older age or whatnot. So I personally would not recommend hanging out, with unvaccinated relatives. Everyone should be upgrading their masks, and we could talk about that a little bit, ideally to K95s or N95s. I should go downstairs and pull out some of my masks to do a demonstration.
No, we got an email over the holiday from our schools saying that they were asking for us to now put N95s on our mask. And Evan and I lost our minds. We already hate that we have to send our kids to school with masks. We're not anti-maskers, by the way, but like, it kills me. And now they're in these masks where they like legitimately can't breathe. But you're saying that that's what we need to be doing right now?
It's because Omicron is just so transmissible and it's airborne, right? It's in the air. So having masks that have like gaping holes on the sides or like a single layer or the bandanas just really aren't going to cut it. I know many of them look cute and cool, but like they're just not helpful anymore. If you want, we can talk about masks a little bit. So like I rank them by like the best masks, better masks, and good okay masks.
In terms of protection, not cuteness or comfort. Okay.
Not looks or comfort.
Okay.
So the best masks are these respirators, the N95, the K95s or K94s. And so they're really good because they actually filter those large and small particles when you breathe in, which other masks don't do. And you don't need an additional layer on top of those masks. So in Canada, there's different companies. Again, there's great resources online on where to find these. Canada Shield, there's different companies that are making these, and you can find them for kids. I will say that we do recommend masks for kids that are 2 and up, so not younger kids. It's really hard for a kid less than 2 years of age to wear a mask, obviously, and it's just not going to happen. The better masks, a little bit less effective, but still good, are those surgical masks. So you might have seen people wearing like those blue tinted masks.
Yeah.
The reason they're still not so good against Omicron is a lot of them, even healthcare providers were wearing them for a really long time and are still wearing them in some places, have gaps on the side. And so if you are wearing those, you can make them more effective even by placing a cloth mask on top to improve the fit. There's other ways to make them more effective as well. And then the good, okay masks are the cloth masks, not just any cloth mask. They have to be like 3 layers, tight fitting. The 3 layers mean 2 layers of tightly woven cotton and a 3rd layer of a non-woven fabric. And they're better when you have a nose wire or adjustable ear loops or straps to reduce the gaps on the face. So many people are saying, really ditch the single layer mask. I personally believe that any mask is better than no mask. But ideally, if you can get a hand on those best masks, those K95s or N95s, that's going to get you most protected and your kid most protected.
Tali, everything you've said has been, I feel, really encouraging and really uplifting. This one, I'm like, wow, where's my
So I got my girls the K95 masks for school.
Yeah, I know. It's just depressing. It's just depressing, but yes. Okay.
So that cloth mask with a filter insert, that would make it a 3-layer mask. Again, that would probably fall under the good okay mask.
Yeah.
So not the most ideal still against Omicron, given that it's airborne and very highly transmissible. But again, it's still good, especially if you have that extra layer, especially if you have it so that it's really well fitted.
Okay. Last follow-up, masking outside.
I think if you're in really close contact, like if your kids are in the park in really close contact for a long period of time, if you can't maintain distance with other people and you're very close and you're outside, then a mask will keep you more protected. But if you're outside going for a walk and you don't have people in your face,
sure,
take off your mask and enjoy the fresh air.
Absolutely. I took my kids to the playground on just this past Sunday, and I was trying to get them to wear a mask, and Dre started crying because previously, pre-Omicron, we had gone to the playground we were cool outside without masks. And I said, okay, you don't have to wear a mask, but you can't get close to other kids. And Dre said, but mommy, I can't not get close to other kids. I was like, well, then.
He's so social. It's great.
It's true. He has no personal space. Okay. So, this was a great question that came in from Hello Dominica on Instagram. She said, what are the developmental and psychological effects of masking kids? If you can just talk a little bit to that.
Yeah. You know what? It's a good question. The truth is we don't know. But in my opinion, like any steps that allow kids to safely interact with each other and with their educators and be in school safely far outweigh any theoretical harms. And I get this pandemic has landed, especially for young children, at a time where, language and emotional development is so key. I will say that prior to the pandemic, researchers actually looked at what the impact of mask wearing is for kids when they're actually trying to pick up expression and learn these cues. They actually found that this was a study from 2012 that kids, when they looked at faces with masks, were actually very good at identifying expression. So they were actually paying more attention to people's eyes. Although another study that I read in 2012 actually found that 4-month-olds pay attention to eyes a bit more to understand expression. But then at 8 months, they actually start paying more attention to lip reading. And then it might revert back to eyes around 1 year of age.
That's so funny because Romy freaks out now when I put a mask on.
When you put on a mask.
Tries to rip it off. And I feel so terrible. And she's advanced. So she's 7 months, but the 8-month thing is really happening right now.
Yeah. And then, there are studies that have been looking at it during the pandemic, and they've studied this question. And researchers have found that kids are having a little bit more trouble interpreting emotion, but it's still better than just by chance. They can interpret emotion, and there is a little bit of a drop in facial recognition. But I think the good news is that kids are adaptable. I really do believe that. I'm not a developmental neuroscientist, but one theory is that maybe kids coming out of the pandemic will have a heightened perception abilities in other areas. So if you're blocking one channel of information, perhaps other abilities might become enhanced. And I think there's things we can do as parents. I think we can set aside time, not with masks, inside our homes, to talk to our kids face to face. Most kids will do just fine with that level of interaction in the morning before school and after school, not having the mask. Your tone and your gestures, so using your hands and body language and your tone of voice have such a big impact to help with the context of what you're saying to your kid. Yeah. What concerns me most is kids that have developmental delays, and how this whole pandemic, particularly school closures, will, further push them behind. That is actually what worries me most. And I think the governments really are going to have to put resources to help identify those kids and to support them in the coming years. I really do feel that way. I think if you have any concern as a parent in terms of their language development or social development, specifically language, you can speak to a speech language pathologist. Many of them are doing virtual assessments or, in person, and they're wearing clear masks. So there's lots of supports. It's an interesting question, but I really want our kids to be at school, and I want our kids to be safely interacting with other kids.
That was what you just said. It sort of sums it all up to me, because I mask my kid. I believe in it, obviously, but I also feel sick about it. It's really hard to see your 3-4-year-old with a little mask. It's really hard to see them with their friends with masks. And yet what you said, I wish you had said this to me 2 years ago, which is wouldn't you rather your kid have some semblance of moving back into school and with friends and playgrounds and be safe than not, than the repercussions of wearing the mask? So thank you for summing it up so beautifully, as you always do. Okay. Quick question about the booster. This is from @PhilMano. Your thoughts on booster shots? Got COVID and I'm double vaxxed.
Yeah, you should still get the booster shot, because data clearly shows that protection from the vaccine is both stronger and longer lasting than sort of naturally acquired COVID-19 infection, and what that immunity offers from naturally acquired COVID-19 infection. You should probably wait until you're fully recovered from COVID-19. Usually that's about 10 symptoms, 10 days, sorry. And also whatever your public health protocol is in terms of isolation, you need to be it needs to be post your isolation period to go get your booster and to go out in life and line up at a vaccine clinic to go get it. But yes, you should get boosted even if you've had COVID and had 2 vaccines.
And this idea that I saw in my comments that the booster is only for extremely vulnerable people, that's just not the case. If you can get it, you should absolutely run to go get it.
Yes, okay. Because against Omicron, you really need that booster. And again, vaccines are very effective at preventing serious illness and death.
And by the way, I was going to ask you, if you have had COVID, you can still get Omicron. And if you've had Omicron, there's a chance you can still get it again.
And that is probably because the immunity offered from, again, naturally acquired COVID-19 infection is just not as good as immunity from a vaccine. And yes, you can get reinfected. And really, that's why just saying, oh, I'll just go get COVID and, then I'll have immunity. Well, it's not bulletproof. You might get infected again. The immunity from infection is just simply not as good as a vaccine. And also nobody should want to get COVID.
So you're telling me I shouldn't just say, fuck it, I'm going to the club tonight without a mask?
Yeah, no.
Well, let me cancel those plans.
I get why people might feel that way right now. It's been a long 2 years almost.
There's a real attitude among my peers of we're all going to get it. So,
I get it. I know. And I think everyone's fed up. I'm fed up. Everyone's done with this. People just want to be done with this. And people are saying let's just have chickenpox parties and get our kids together and just all of us get COVID. But as you said, you can still get reinfected. As an adult, especially, you don't know if you're going to be that one with COVID that gets more serious illness and that ends up in hospital. So nobody should want to get COVID. And the other thing is, if we all had that mentality, let's just get it, we're going to overwhelm our hospital system, which is already so overwhelmed. And again, you don't know if you're going to give it to somebody who's even more vulnerable than you are and who could die. I don't know how many people watching has had someone who's died, but I have lost patients, wonderful, good, amazing people who just happen to have, lower immune systems, who have died. And so we're really trying to protect those who are most vulnerable, our health system. And again, you can get reinfected. Your immune response is not as good from infection as it is to a vaccine.
And by the way, just to dispel this other misinformation that is rampant on my feeds, garbage truck, if you can hear that, just an evening garbage truck, is that a vaccine, they work. People who are well, vaccines don't work because you're still getting COVID. The likelihood of patients dying who are vaccinated is much lower, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
100%. Okay. So yes, they are working for that exact reason.
So I want to talk about quickly about tests, because there's a little confusion. During the holiday break recently, I was convinced I had COVID. I could not schedule a PCR test anywhere. Yeah. So I ordered and took not one, but 3 rapid tests at home. They were all negative, but are they reliable? Are rapid tests reliable for Omicron?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're getting a little bit more research and this is evolving. So my answer now might be different than a week from now. But by the way, maybe you just didn't have COVID. So they were truly negative tests.
It turns out I have mastitis, which has all the symptoms of COVID plus an infected breast.
Yeah. I can't even talk about mastitis. I had it twice and I like have PTSD thinking about mastitis. So
when we end this live, I'm just going to lift my top up for you and show it to you. It's
That's
real. Nothing you haven't seen before.
Oh, I know. It's the worst. Mastitis is the worst. COVID is bad. Mastitis is the worst.
Right. But enough about my infected breast. Go on.
Okay. So rapid test. So there's this new Swiss research was basically suggesting that the sensitivity, so ability to rule out COVID with a rapid test in the early phases of your infection drops to 50%. So that means let's say 100 people have COVID-19, 50 of them will test positive, but 50 of them will have a false negative result. Okay, so it's a newer research study. We still need more research.
That means it's not particularly reliable.
In the early phases. And we think that's maybe because the variant, people are so infectious at a much lower viral load than other variants. Right. So low that it can't be picked up by rapid antigen test, but only from those PCR tests that actually amplify the genetic material. So only a PCR test would be able to pick it up. Yeah. Issues in provinces like Ontario, you can barely get a PCR test now. Right. So I think the moral of the story is you shouldn't be doing a rapid test in isolation. So you can't feel 100% confident if it's negative that you're good to go. They can be helpful when it's added to other measures like mask wearing, proper ventilation, filtration, all the things we've been talking about. And the other really important thing is that Omicron might live in tissues at the back of the mouth. So there's some recommendations now. Instead of just only swabbing the nose, you should also be swabbing the back of the throat as well.
Even on a rapid test where it just mine just said to do the nose, I should do the mouth and the nose.
Yeah.
In that order.
M before N.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
I have to just say though, doing rapid tests on kids can be hard, especially trying to do a swab at the back of a kid's throat. So this is a little bit of a matter of a judgment for parents to make. It depends. Some kids are fine with it. Some adults are fine with it. Some kids are traumatized by it. I've seen many kids who are just so fearful of getting a COVID swab. And so if your kid is sick, you can basically assume that they have COVID. Maybe you and your family will decide, I'm not going to do a rapid test. I'm just going to isolate for the recommended period of time and call it a day. I mean, it really depends on the kid and the family.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I know you're concentrating really hard on providing these insightful answers, but everybody is shouting you out in the comments and saying how incredible you are and how helpful you are.
I can't see the comments.
So appreciate it. And we're not going to keep you here till midnight. I promise. So I just want to jump right.
It's okay. My husband's putting my kids to bed. I'm good. This is
a vacation for you. You should have brought, usually we drink on these lives. I just felt it wasn't appropriate. Also the infected breast. Okay. So, I just want to ask you quickly, and I'm hoping this is sort of I want to wrap it up in a way. But first, I just want to know about these new isolation guidelines because people are rather confused. For the homies in Ontario, I know this applies that there's a 5-day isolation guideline. What's the deal?
Yeah, I think it's so confusing. I think it's a full-time job trying to keep up with these guidelines.
We were supposed to go into a bubble for 14 days and now it's 5 days and you're cool. I'm so confused.
It's really, really hard to keep up. You honestly need to Google it and look it up and remind yourself each time. I think these guidelines, CDC made changes, Ontario's now made changes. It's important to distinguish between vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So people who are not vaccinated still need to follow that 10-day isolation period from symptom onset. But if you are vaccinated, you can still get infected. And that's not because, again, that the vaccines don't work. It's just because, Omicron is way more infectious, but you're still protected against severe illness and death. But basically, if symptoms resolve by day 5, you can end isolation. So this has led to a lot of controversy because there's not really great evidence that you're not infectious at day 5, especially with Omicron. Some experts are saying maybe it really should be extended to 7 days. And some other experts are saying, well, maybe on day 5, you should do a rapid antigen test. And if it's negative once or maybe twice, then you can come out. So basically, It's a little bit controversial.
Yeah.
But I think what people are trying to, like the people that are making decisions, not me, the people high above, are trying to balance between infection control and like our economics and allowing people to go back to work,
I know.
especially with essential workers and healthcare workers. We
Yeah.
can't have all these people out of the workforce for so long. So I think they're just trying to balance this very difficult sort of decision between infection control and getting people back to work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that helps a little bit. I want to end, and I want to end with a question. Came in from Kimberly Ellen, and I'm really hoping her answer is going to be optimistic. She says, "Will COVID always be around? Will there always be new variants?" And if I can just piggyback on that great question, will we be getting boosted to the end of time?
Yeah. So I am not a medical historian. There are medical historians, and I'm not one of them.
Okay.
But I think if you look at history, all pandemics throughout the history of time have ended one way or another. And I think I want to say that this will end too. It definitely will end. You know, I think while 2 years might seem like eternity, especially for parents, I feel like it really has felt like an eternity. You know, we have to realize that at a macro level, these 2 years are really a speck in time. I know it doesn't feel that way right now. You know, when we think about the last major pandemic in 1918, it ended around like 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And despite Omicron being so infectious, I think many people are saying that this is like the storm before the calm, that there will be a lot of exposure to the virus, and, you know, it's inevitably going to generate conferred immunity in our communities. And I truly hope that everyone that gets infected is vaccinated so that they don't have serious illness or end up in hospital, and that they're spared the worst of it. I think, you know, over the next few weeks, there likely will be tragedy, especially in vulnerable populations, and there will be long-term consequences of all of this. But COVID will end, and maybe it will become endemic, you know, similar to what we see with seasonal influenza. And we might still require yearly vaccination, similar to what we do with the seasonal flu vaccine. But I really do think there's hope ahead of this. I think we're in our toughest times, and it will be tough over the next few weeks, not months, hopefully. You know, we see from other places in the world, it peaks, but it also comes down. I'm specifically talking about Omicron. Do I know if there's going to be another variant? I don't know. I'm specifically talking about this wave, but I think there is hope on the horizon, even if it might be a difficult few weeks ahead.
Let me just find my applause sound effect, because that's what we need to hear. Because at this point, it feels like it's never going to end. And
it will in one way or another. We don't know how exactly, but it will.
It will. Okay. Oh, in October 2020, my then 5-year-old predicted the end of COVID will be October 16th, 2022. You know what, Meredith? Let's go with that. She is the next Tyler Henry of our time, and who, you know, didn't predict this, but your daughter is better, and we'll go with that. Last question, just to follow up. Will the Jessie Cruikshank Up Close and Too Personal for Real This Time live tour be happening across Canada in May? Tali, please, for the love of God, say yes, because I need to see these people in the comments in person so badly.
I actually think there's hope that that can happen. I really do. But honestly, only if I get to come and fangirl you.
I think you just earned yourself a free ticket. I think let the record show that you will be there. And I hope that we will be so far beyond this pandemic that all of these people won't come rushing you to ask you questions about masks and tests and antibodies. Tali, I just need to personally fangirl you for a second. And everybody, please jump in the comments if you feel the same way about this conversation and about this incredible woman. I have learned more in the last hour and 4 minutes than I think I have in the last month, like obsessively reading my newsfeed at 2 a.m. Thank you for clarifying so many things. Thank you for providing fact-based, science-based information. Thank you for not judging anybody's questions or fears. And honestly, thank you so much for the work you're doing at Pandemic Pregnancy Guide to really provide all of that up-to-date information for women during the pandemic. Again, you have to follow her there on Instagram. And I also just wanted to say that our last live that we did together, I'm going to get emotional. I think it's probably half mastitis, but you had told me and really reassured me that getting vaccinated while pregnant was the right thing to do. And I have had so many women who watched that live tell me that because of you, they went out and they got vaccinated either while pregnant or if they were even hesitant because of you and the information you provided. So you're changing a small amount of lives here and then just so many more in terms of what you do at the hospital as a doctor and with your Instagram feed. So thank you on behalf of myself and everybody watching. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and get some rest.
I will. Thank you. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Tali Bogler, everybody. Oh my gosh. It's true. I am tearing up and schwitzing a little bit. This was so informative. I hope you feel the same way. And I just want to say to you all, thank you for being here. I'm blown away by how many of you chose to spend this Wednesday. Many of you who, by the way, were doing online school all day and are probably so exhausted and tired of looking at a screen. You joined us anyway. Just by being here and listening and wanting to learn and educate yourself, you are being an amazing parent. So know that. Be safe. We're going to get through this. I will be here for you and I will see you in person in May. That's what the doctor said, kind of. Thank you, everybody. Have an amazing night. Oh, good night. Mwah. I see you all in the comments. Oh my gosh. Thank you, everybody. Oh, I'm so happy. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Holly. Thank you, guys. And thank you, Tali.